This is Ron Langer. We're at Grassroots TV in Aspen, Colorado. I'm interviewing Gino Hollander, that's Eugene F. Hollander, who lives currently in Aspen, was born in Newark, New Jersey on August 4th, 1924. He served with the 10th Mountain Division, 86th Regiment, achieving the rank of Staff Sergeant, served from January 10th, 1943 through September 1945. So, Gino, I'd like to start out just talking a little bit about growing up. I have particular interest because I'm also a New Jersey boy. Mm-hmm. I know you were born in Newark. What were things like growing up in Newark in the 20s and 30s?
Well, the 20 part I don't remember very well. I was born in 1924, so yeah, not much recall of that. We went to, well, they weren't even suburbs then. It wasn't the name that was given. Mm-hmm. None of the highways were started.
Right.
But you migrated somehow or other, and we went to Maplewood and the South Orange area in 1930. And that's where I pick up my memory, more or less.
Yeah.
I had been in Europe for almost a year before that, which is 1929, with my family. And I have memories of that, just vague ones, of the museums and of this and that and so on.
Why did they travel to Europe?
My father was an executive in a fur business, fur dyeing and dressing, which in Newark was a very big one, A. Hollander and Son.
Mm-hmm. So this was a business trip that
he had been traveling since the 1920s yearly by boat for the firm. There were some plants in Europe, and he went over, and every once in a while the family went with him.
Mm-hmm. And this was 1929?
1929, 1930.
So it was that was the year of the stock market crash.
Yeah, but somehow or other the firm did fairly well with the rabbits dyed beaver or whatever it was, or rabbits dyed mink, and they did pretty well. And they got through that period. It's disappeared since and changed, but it had been around about 50 years at the time. That was my background. I expected to go into it when as work.
And so you went to school and graduated high school in Maplewood?
In South Orange, New Jersey.
South
Orange. And from there, awful student. Just awful. I don't know how many days I attended, but as I recall, it was at least a day a week I wasn't there. I just sort of wasn't with it somehow or other, and nobody pinned me down on it, and one thing and the other. I was a media. I came in with C's or something, but not attentive, and it's not the way that I've ever learned in that fashion. I learned by doing. And from there, I graduated. I suppose I went to Hobart because I had a C average instead of one of the other schools, Yoda. But it was nice, and
Hobart's in upper New York State.
Yes, it's a small liberal arts college. It was very nice. I had no problem with it, and did very well. Immediately took to it well. It was a different atmosphere, but I guess it was from the film and also the times. You would have had to been there to know, but we were losing a war in a big way, and the entire nation was involved. And so it was in the spirit of things as well
that you decided
that
to
I
enlist.
volunteered. By seeing, I had seen a training film at school of the 10th Mountain Division. If I drop back to my youth just for a moment, the only thing I really remember strongly of really being turned on by is at 13 years old, I went off on a bike trip from New Jersey. This was from Maplewood. And I went for 1,000 miles into Canada. This was alone. Cooked up some story or other with my family. We were going with somebody. It didn't work out that way, and I went alone. And I just remember, even today, I remember every day of that. And it was a long trip. And came down, went up through the valley into St. Johnsbury Center, and then crossed into Canada, came down past Mount Washington. It was my first real view of mountains. Circled Mount Washington and then back home. Until the ski troops, nothing else happened. That was from 13 till 17 or 18 in the ski troops, and then I found mountains out here.
So your experience with the mountains at that age
came out of that.
Also led to your deciding that you wanted to join.
I don't think there was any question about it. It was one of those things that turned me on, and afterward, I didn't find very much of it around. But once I was up at Hobart, there was a lot of involvement in outdoors, and not enough to warrant, say, the ski troops, because the initial group were all the skiers, competitive skiers, mountain climbers, the immigrants from out of Europe, every skier in the country, but then there were no more. I mean, skiing was not an in thing, and so they started to pick those. You had 3 letters of recommendation. Those people who had a love for outdoors, who had been outdoors, who had some kind of involvement and whatnot. And so you were a volunteer. And once in, there was no way of out. I mean, you couldn't transfer to another outfit. You were in. It was quite a group.
How many years of college had you had when you dropped out to join the
3 months.
3 months, okay.
And it was going well. But it just wasn't the time.
Yeah.
And never went back.
Okay. And so this was 1943?
I volunteered in the end of 1942, in December of 42, and I went in January.
And you were 19 at the time?
18.
18. Okay.
And all that means.
What does it mean?
Well, you think it's everything. There you are, and it is. I mean, we are what we are at the time we are. But boy, life is a changeable feast. And as you look back, it's just a different ball game all the way. But at the time when you're 18, you're everything. You're it. And on the other hand, to be, in charge of 30 men or 20 men and life-giving and taking situations,
you grow up quickly.
You grow up very quickly. That whole experience has carried me through life.
Where did you do your basic training?
Where
did you do basic training?
At Camp Hale, Colorado, which is somewhere around 9.5, almost 10,000 feet, the base camp. So it's really the first time I ever saw mountains in that sense. These 14,000-foot peaks all along. And it was very, very difficult basic training. They really laid it on. 90-pound packs became the de rigueur. It wasn't all the time. Sometimes you were in 50 or 60, but once a week you were out on a progressively longer 90-pound pack march. Well, at 118 pounds, 90 pounds is a lot of pounds going, but that's at 18, right?
Right.
Or 20. And it was just, at the same time, it was extremely rugged for everybody in going. On the other hand, the surroundings for me were fantastic, and the people were very, very nice. We got involved in, at an early point, somewhere in 1943, not long after I was there, another 3 or 4 months later, the reconnaissance, who were the trainers, who were the professional skiers that were with us, I always thought it was to cook up for themselves an excuse to go from Camp Hale to Aspen, cross country. Fun thing to do, right? But you're in the Army and you're in the ski trips out, so you have a reason. So it was a training reason to test out and whatnot. So it was about half and half, about 15 of those recon people and 17 of the division. They picked from each battalion a couple. I don't know how I got picked. I have no idea. I was already I think I was a corporal at the time. Gung-ho, but everybody else was too. Anyway, and very light. I was one of those, and that was 4 days of a ski trek, midwinter, 50 miles, carried everything yourself, 90 pounds, skis and snowshoes. On new snow, you're going along, you have about 5 minutes for the lead man, he steps aside, the others keep going because you just can't break snow. You just can't do it that long. And it just kept going. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but on the other hand, probably the thing that I'll remember last, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It did more good than anything else. We got to here and into the Hotel Jerome, $1 a night at the Hotel Jerome with food. And then we skied here for 3 or 4 days and then went back, fortunately, by truck.
Yeah. Tell me about the kind of skis that you used when you trained.
Well, they were really a lift of the old Norwegian boards. Mine were 7'4". I have a pair at home that are the same right now. Also the ski snowshoes, which stand this tall, and the old shape snowshoes, which are wonderful. No edges. A double hitch rear throw binding, you know. That was it. Very heavy.
Very heavy, yeah. And so...
so when you're marching along with your 90 pounds and you have your skis over your shoulders and you're on snowshoes, you don't want to sit down without somebody to help you to get up because you're just not going to make it.
Right. So you would use the snowshoes to go uphill and then put the skis on for going down?
No, not at all. It's just that we went through train. They really cooked one up. They took an azimuth, you know, on your compass, an azimuth, and that's where we went. Not left or right. We followed the azimuth. Well, if you've ever been out in the woods and you've ever been out in the mountains, it's, you know, it's really an ultimate test because you never know what's going to happen. So we were in woods. When it called for snowshoes for better work, we were on snowshoes. Otherwise, we were on skis.
And then, did you have skins for the skis to go uphill? Yeah.
Whatever would be faster, it was time to change and on. The recon boys decided that.
And were you also carrying weapons?
I had an M1.
M1.
Heavy mother.
So that was in addition to the 90 pounds?
No. Total. Yeah, 90 pounds.
90 pounds. What else was involved in that training?
Well, other than the regular service training in any outfit, we were a mountain troop, so we really learned mountains. We were on 1 force march a week. We were out in the mountains every single day. We were rock climbing. We even had some para jumping training, but it was ground training, not from planes. So they had a rig up where you did all your practicing, but they figured eventually we might be dropping in some area. They had a D series, which was a test of the division whether they were ready for fighting. We had an inordinate amount of training. I mean, this outfit went from the beginning of 1943 until September of 1944 in full training, which was probably 3-4 times as long as normal. They didn't know where to send us.
Yeah.
They didn't know where it would best be, and they decided on Italy and the line that had been drawn by the Germans at the time. to break the Apennines, which for 2 years we were unable to do. The outfits before us were unable to do. Anyway, they did this D series where the entire division went out, and it was rough. It's 2 weeks outside, all technical, midwinter, no fires. So you built your igloos, your snow caves. You had all your equipment you carried along. Really rough stuff, and it came through fine. That was it.
Did any guys not make it?
Did what?
Did any guys not make it through the training?
Through the training? Oh, I'm sure there were a number. In my outfit, I don't remember any that went out that way. 2 died. One in a mortar accident, and another came down with, as most of us did, very bad croups and coughs, and it developed into a pneumonia streptococcus. He was a bunkmate of mine, and he died. And along the way, I got sick while he was sick, and I was hauled in the hospital. It was oxygen for about a month. And the medicine that had been brought out, the new miracle medicine, which happened to be streptomycin, was the first time it had been used in this particular outfit, was there, and they gave it to me and saved me. Knocked my hearing out and a few things like that, but brought me out and then onward. But I don't remember, on the march that I spoke of, the 32 from the ski troops and the 32 of the Rincon, nobody dropped out in the whole thing. Amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah. You wouldn't have been able to be rescued there if you did drop out along the way.
Not a chance. Not a chance. But they were competent. The reconnaissance men were really trained. Good. I mean, everything was fine in Camp Hale. When we got overseas and went over, of course, we went over in suntans, and this was in, I don't know, September, October. And where are we going? We're going to Italy, but it was going to be a big surprise, and the Germans shouldn't know we're there. I guess they felt we were going to the east or someplace. But we didn't have any of our equipment. It never did show up. So all this magnificent equipment that the sea troops trained with never came over. Lots of cigarettes came over and lots of beer with the ships coming in, but not the mules, not the wonderful, wonderful down equipment or bunny boots. We had superb equipment. It just didn't work out that way. It was a big war. Lots of things didn't happen. Lots of things happened.
Did the skis and snowshoes get over?
No, but we got them from the Germans. Those that we captured and whatnot, and that's how we were supplied by both skis and snowshoes. Never did get the skis from the States. But and there wasn't too much. There was snow. We went through a whole winter in foxholes of snow. We were pinned down in front of what Riva Ridge was a lookout point for the Germans, so they could see anything we were doing. You could constant firing and whatnot. We were pinned down in foxholes there for some 2.5 months before we broke through.
And where were you pinned down?
Well, above Pisa, in the Apennine, on the Apennine front, in front of us was a mountain range, included Riva Ridge, which is the high point of that range, and on Belvedere, another one behind it. And it had been that way, I think, more or less a year and a half. And that's why they brought this division in. And it worked. We were able to make the assault on Riva Ridge and the rest of the outfit on the others, and we broke through to the Po Valley.
Tell me about the assault on Riva Ridge.
Well, it goes back to the training that we had, really, the laying out of the routes of what it was going to be, while we were in this foxhole situation before we went out on patrols all the time, sometimes on skis, sometimes not, trying to capture some of the Tedeschi of the Germans in order to get some information what we're doing, and also our patrols were going up the ridge. The plan was to take the ridge, and then the other two mountain ridges next to them, which gave them the high point to land any kind of artillery below. So it was about a 2-week preparation before, and we took off very late one night, and a group assaulted the ridge, and at the same time the 86th and 85th moved on their places that they were assigned to. And it was a total breakthrough. I mean, tremendous fire and a very, very heavy loss of life on our part, but completely surprised the Germans in the assaulting of the ridge. Literally, I mean, coming up over the side of the ridge, which was not a great big mountain climb, but it was significant enough that nobody thought it could be done. And up on ropes in the middle of the night.
Climbing up a cliff.
Cliff, but not impossible cliff.
Okay.
But a cliff that you needed rope all the way, and you had all your ammunition, equipment. Very difficult stuff. Middle of the night. And fortunately, they could have done anything to us. I had one man. There was out to be no shooting, no anything. It was knives only if you ran into any enemies and guards, because you didn't want to alert them. And skill and suerte and luck. They got to the top. And when they did, surprise the troops on the top, and there was a big bottle of air, but at the same time, the rest of our outfit took off. And my particular outfit was on for Dell'Oratio, the 3rd Battalion.
Dell'Oratio was
the last ridge that overlooked the valley, so we would be in a position overlooking the Germans in the valley, and they weren't about to give that up. It was a hard battle all the way for everybody in the division, and we succeeded in taking all 3 in Dell'Oratio. I remember very clearly a bombardment that seemed like 2 days long. It was something like 12, 14 hours straight of bombardment, and you're digging in on a ridge in mountains with lots of stone, not so easy, and a lot of losses. I had at the time I was in charge of a platoon of mortars, 81 mortars. I had been in a rifle company, Company L, but just when we went down to Texas, before we came overseas, they decided to have a heavy weapons company added, and my company commander was shifting over to there, and also the first sergeant, and they brought me with them. They suggested I go, and I said, "What's the reason to go? You have all your buddies here, and you're set in your place." He said, "Well, it's not going to do you any harm to be in a heavy weapons company as opposed to a rifle company in combat." And that didn't really feel. Actually, it was so. The casualties were much heavier in the rifle companies. But as it turns out, Dole was with us, for instance, Senator Dole, and he was hit just a few days. He came in as a repo depot, a replacement, and in coming in was assigned to, as a lieutenant, as a forward observer for whether it was a mortar crew, I don't know, but we all had him. And he was hit the first day when he was up there, and that was the end of or within the first few days of his career. And that was the end of that. Well, it happened to us 3 times with lieutenants, so I then, as the staff sergeant in charge of the platoon, I go up and everybody steps in below and fills in. So I was up there most of the time as an observer in front, and at one point we lost our communications completely. And
were you communicating by radio?
Oh no, through wire. You have wire. You have radio for other things, but you have direct contact to your guns, which are like 800 yards back or so, or more, 600. And so I went back. I left the 2 people who were guarding me up in front, and one of them had I had sent back, and there was no word, no change. So I went back and got a few guys, and we laid the wire and came back up in the middle of a hail of fire. And anyway, it got me a Bronze Star along the line. It's the kind of thing we were trained to do, that's all.
Mm-hmm. Surely there's more to that story than that.
Well, the actual award, I can't tell you what it is, because St. Louis managed, where all our records are held, managed to burn the whole thing up at some point or other on the 10th. And so a lot of what awards came from, a lot of the history of our own outfit went up in flames in a fire in the government storage in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the bronze. You received a Bronze Star for valor, right?
And a cluster.
And
that means another Bronze Star.
Yeah, right.
It is for valor in both. But on the other hand, hard call, huh? For the guys that are getting, I mean, there are cases that just heroic action on the part of some people. Mm-hmm. It's like a wound. You can get a wound, you can bleed, you can have your knee exposed and so on, and you can have your leg cut off, you know, and you can really be shattered. There are differences, although you get the same medals, you know.
Yeah, but this medal was awarded because you were a forward observer,
above and beyond
the
duty. I had no need to go back or reason to go back. I could have sent the other men and so on. Yeah. And there was a replay of that. Another person got hurt, and there's another, back and forth anyway. I came through all right.
When you say a replay of it at another time?
No, it just kept on. They blew it up again. And back again I went.
Oh, you mean your wire, your communications?
Yeah, and you're completely exposed when you're doing it and going. But there's really no other choice. I got 3 guns back there, and they're inoperative, and they're needed, and it's my platoon. But it's not quite as heroic as it may sound. It's one of the things you do, and did.
It's what you were trained for.
To do.
And at the time, it's not something you consider the alternatives. You do it.
You know, as far as staying alive in a war, when you're on a front line, it doesn't make any difference what you do. You don't know where it's coming from. It's a crap game. I mean, you literally have no idea where that next shell is coming. So to go for good coverage or not good coverage, to be in a foxhole, none of it makes any difference, really. Yeah, a foxhole, if you're down below the surface, the shrapnel is going to go like this and miss you, but it also can go boom, right there. And I once had put a base plate. We were in a heavy fire thing, and I said, "Lend me your base plate," to one of my mortar men. And I'm going to use it on top of my foxhole. There's just too much going on. And I'll be damned if a shell didn't come down. And I ended up 3 days in a hospital. It just hit the top of the base plate and went boom, saving a life.
Yeah.
Well, other people carried these things on their back for the same reason, but it's all a crapshoot. You don't know. If you're lucky, you survive, and if you're not, you infect it.
So when that shell hit the base plate that was over your foxhole, what did it do to you?
I don't know for 3 days. It just, you know, the sound is huge and you lose it. I wasn't unconscious, but everything is, and it kept on for a long time.
So it was a concussion.
Yeah, but came through it.
Yeah.
And just fortunate, that's all.
You were wounded twice during those, what was it, 3 months? That you
No, it wasn't 2 months. We arrived in September of '44, and the war was over in '45 of May.
Yeah.
But every bit of it was on the front line.
So
We lost
7 months of that
We
was
lost
combat.
almost 1,000 men.
And out of how large a unit?
10,500, 11,000.
Huh. Yeah.
10% dead.
Yeah.
But it's a very short engagement time.
Mm-hmm.
The percentage of losses were very high. And wounded were very high too. It was on the, because, you know, many outfits were there for 2-3 years, the entire wartime.
Mm-hmm.
And just by circumstances of our training and whatnot, we were in training longer and we weren't. Which is the reason after the war in Europe ended, we were heading for the invasion of Japan. When in mid-ocean, leaving Europe to come to the States for a furlough before transferring to Japan, the announcement of the bomb, the atomic bomb. Mm-hmm. And the war was over. But rightfully, they were going to send us on because our service record had been very, very good, but very short.
Yeah. So you hadn't earned enough points to be discharged.
Well, the whole outfit was going.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to be discharged.
Yeah.
While Japan was still there was none of this discharge business.
Yeah.
The war was not over. It was very much on. Once the Japanese surrendered, then points kicked in, and I got out right away.
Yeah.
I had plenty of points.
Mm-hmm.
With a couple of Bronze Stars and a couple of Purple Hearts, it makes up for whatever your time out there was.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me how you were wounded.
Both times by fragments of 88 shells. The first time was very, very minor, just pieces of shrapnel there, one here, a couple in my chest, but very small pieces, and not significant at all. But you bleed, you get a Purple Heart. I think I was 2 days in the hospital or something. The second time I was just lucky. Well, you're lucky if you survive any time and going. But I led my platoon into this tunnel, which is one of the 4 or 5 tunnels along Lake Garda. And we knew we had been chasing the Germans after the Riva Ridge and Della Torratia. We then poured into, almost immediately, within, I think it was within the 4 days, 3 days, so they couldn't recoup. And we poured into the Po Valley, and we had something like 4 divisions or 5 divisions of German soldiers to our rear. We just kept moving and moved very fast, and right up to the Alpine borders, and then up Lake Garda, and the Germans were retreating in that section, and they had set long before, in the previous 2 or 3 years, after the Gothic line, they had set the next line, which was in the Alps. So into the mountains were carved their gun emplacements for their 88s
And everything was sighted in.
Everything sighted. Very difficult. So we expected a tremendous problem going up. It didn't result in that kind of problem as much as we thought, except these tunnels in Lake Garda. And the incident that happened, we got into a tunnel, so all kinds of bodies around. It was presumed that the Germans had tried to explode the tunnel, and the explosion went off prematurely, and there must have been the remnants of 50 to 75 Germans in there. And we were resting. There had been a lot of shell fire from across Lake Garda coming in, as well as in front of us. And it had been a wild dash for 4 days. We're resting in the tunnel, just laying back against the tunnel, and the Germans happened to put an 88 shell right down the center of the tunnel entrance, and exploded within the tunnel and caused massive damage, just huge. I had a best friend, Ray Hellman, no longer with us, who was a sergeant in the same outfit, and was lying right next to me. and reach for his stomach, and screaming and whatnot. I'm hit on the stomach, and we rolled him over. I went to, and his St. Christopher's medal, which was huge, was bent in half. Piece of shrapnel came in, and he's lying on the wall. The medal's right here, and hit the thing, and the shrapnel's on his stomach. Yeah, he's yelling like hell. And while I'm doing this, somebody says, "What's with you?" And my whole knee is exposed, and I have all kinds of shrapnel and whatnot. But I tell you, in the moment, when you're hit, there's an adrenaline shot that's amazing. If it hasn't cut anything severely, you just don't feel any of the local pain or what's happening. And besides, there was such a mess around.
Yeah.
And so it was hauling everybody out and this kind of thing and that. And we put in our wounded into a landing craft that had come over and been sent over across Lake Garda to get them. And with big Red Cross landing craft, and it went off and it was hit. It was fired on by the Germans. It was hit by 88s. And we lost a number of men on that. I don't know how many. But these were of the wounded that we put on. Yeah. I didn't get on because I just wasn't as bad as that. I mean, the whole kneecap was showing. I mean, you're pretty racked up. Yeah. But I was still moving, and there were people far, far worse than this, so we put them on. Saved my life. Yeah. That's the way it goes. So.
And so were you evacuated then in a later...
right then, I was sent back for a while for recuperation for about a week. But the war was over the next day. That was it.
Okay.
In Italy.
Right.
Not in Germany. And we then as I got back to my outfit, we were sent from our place in the Alps where we were sitting. The war was going on in Europe Major, whereas where we were, it was then an armistice, or it had ended. And we were sent over to the Yugoslavian, Italian-Austrian border because Tito was kicking up a fuss. And that was kind of nice because we ended up with some skiing in the Alps. And it wasn't so bad. And then we hung around until our call for Japan. And shipped back and on shipboard on the way back. And we knew we were going in for invasion. We were going to be given a week's furlough first at home, and then we were to assemble and go. And I think it was about 3 days out from New York, the announcement came of the dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima. And
what was your reaction when you heard that news?
Who knew from a bomb?
Yeah.
Just think about it. I mean, you're getting secondhand information. I mean, it's fine when you're sitting 20 years later or 40 years later, you still don't know, but you realize what happened. But at the time, it was unthinkable. And the information didn't flow through. But obviously it had served its purpose. And anything that had stopped the war, I don't think that you could have found very many soldiers who would have said we shouldn't have dropped the bomb.
Exactly. So you arrived in New York. You were given leave. And then were you discharged shortly after? I was
given leave, went home, got married. Got married on VJ Day. The actual VJ Day when the surrender was going on board the ships in the Tokyo Bay is when we were married. And then I went back to Camp Hale. No, where did we get discharged from? Not Hale. I think it was Swift. Yeah, I went back to Swift.
It's Texas?
And in Texas. Because Hale was then being used, I think, as a prisoner of war camp, and et cetera, which they later took the entire thing down because of the problems with Smokefield Valley. There was just no way to sustain it. Yeah. I went back to Swift, and I think it was another 3 months before we were discharged.
And what did you do then after discharge?
Well, back home, newly married and whatnot, and set up, I was living in in Maplewood and moved to a town called Verona, which is, in Jersey. And I went to work in the business my father was in.
In the fur business.
Which had always taken for granted I would be in Hollanderizing or a Hollander. I sort of didn't like it right from the beginning. Maybe it was a comparison to what I had been through or whatnot. I stayed with them about 3 years, 3 or 4 years, and then I went into competition with them. Actually, I had learned quite a bit, and I set up my own business in fur cleaning with one of the people who had been in with me. Fortunately or unfortunately, I picked the man who was in charge of sales for Hollanderizing, so that wasn't a bad partner to have to start a new business. But that didn't really work for me either in my home life. As many who came back from the war, we had married at 21, and that doesn't reason for it. And this was very early because divorces sort of didn't exist in 1945, 46, 1950.
Yeah.
It was very early for that kind of a thing. And I'm Jewish, I'm Sephardic Jewish, and I'll tell you, it must have been back to the first, the first temple. There wasn't a divorce all the way back. That's for sure. At any rate, we were separated at the time.
So that was a big deal.
It was a big deal
within your family.
And I had 2 children by then. It was a very big deal. It wasn't a question of the family, our own family, as all divorces are and all separations. And I had 2 children. I was then 26 years old, 27. I had dissatisfied with the work I was doing. I had started my own business and realized as I was doing it, it wasn't the Hollanders that was the problem. It was the work. It was what I was doing. And I had no idea. Wandered over to the village. And my wife just happened to wander, my wife-to-be, Barbara, just happened to wander into a bar called Louis in Sheridan Square. Took one look and said, that's for me, I guess, and that was that. And we've been together 4 years now. She was a filmmaker. And I knew, films are a culture now, it's everything on everybody said. But then it was something so special and something apart. And to be a woman in filmmaking just didn't exist. And to be a woman in filmmaking in New York was another didn't. She was great at what she was doing. And it caught fire, and I was looking for something, and she set me up in it. And when you have somebody who's better than you are at what you do, you
So what kind of films were you making?
Watching your rear end, you come out pretty good. And it was a great career.
What kind of films were you making?
Everything from documentaries and industrials to, I worked on features. They weren't my own feature, but I did Sweet Smell of Success for 3 or 4 months, Hill, Lancaster. I became a Screen Directors Guild member and spent 3 or 4 years directing. We ended up with our own company making, that's what we wanted the most. And we made 2 or 3 films a year, and it was very good, Barbie and I together. Meanwhile, we had 3 kids together, and so it's a family of 5 children. And
so your kids from your first marriage, did they come to live with you?
While we were in films, we saw them a lot, but not then. Later on, and it's a little ahead of the story, when I give up all those films and I become a painter. We're off to Spain, and that's when the children joined us.
Before we get to that point, did you suffer any psychological effects from your combat experience when you first got back?
Well, the tunnel thing perhaps, but not there again. It's so minor that it's not even countable. I mean, if I then went into a tunnel, or even now, I still had the same kind of a thing. You all of a sudden break into a little sweat and whatnot, but no big deal. And you learn to overcome it, and that's it. But other than that, nothing. I mean, wars horrible. But there was never any question of the worthwhileness of this particular war. And I don't think it was on very many people's mind. They were conscientious objectors, and I can understand it, and I wasn't one at the time. Mm-hmm. I almost join it now, but anyway, no, I didn't suffer. If anything, it gave me the wherewithal, the inner strength to do many things that perhaps I wouldn't have done with this advantageous training that I had, but not reality. This was reality, and gave me a lot of confidence.
Yeah, that's the term that just came to mind, that it must have given you a tremendous amount of self-confidence.
Well, that trip that I mentioned of the trek over from those 50 miles is the hardest thing I've ever been involved in. I mean, there was nothing overseas, including staying in a foxhole with bombardments happening and all the things that would happen in one, came even close. And surely nothing in civilian life that ever came close. And I've done a lot of things in the way of personal touching wilderness. Lots of us do it in our own way. I did it later in life in the last 15 years that I've been in Aspen. And hairy, but not of that category.
Yeah.
That just gives you the ability to know that you can go through things more than you think you can.
Yeah. So let's move then to when you went over to Spain. That was early 60s?
Well, I met Barbara. Barbara and I met in 53. And by 54, I was heavily into filmmaking. She had gotten me a place as a assistant on what was the first television was just sort of starting. We're very early. It was the first long series, a thing called Wanted. And I went 6 months out on the road, and in being this assistant, but hadn't been through a lot of things, I soaked up everything in those 6 months of everybody I was watching, and I came back a fairly accomplished film person and with the guts to go on. From the next job after that was going to the North Pole, running somebody else's crew, not as an assistant.
Going to the North Pole?
Well, the same director I was with on Wanted got a job from CBS, which was High Adventure, one of the early series, an hour color film series. And one of them had to do, he was going to take a crew up to the North Pole. And he called on me. He said, hey, would you run this thing for me? He knew my background in the ski troops and this and that. He knew what I had done from my $30 a week start to about $800 in those days money coming out, in which I had accomplished a fair amount.
Yeah.
And he said, would you run the whole thing? And I said, you kidding? And he said, no. That was it. I hired the crew, and we went up with 25 people, and we stayed in the Arctic Circle for 6 months and to the North Pole. Well, we had lots of airplanes, and we didn't do it by hiking and this and that, but it was a good, rugged go, and brought them all back alive. It was a wonderful adventure. I'll tell you one little story because it's really worth it. In this crew, and it was my production, but we had the 5 leading explorers of the early Arctic days who were still alive. Sir Hubert Wilkins, who had gone with Perry, Burnt Balkan. They were 5 very famous people and going. And we brought them all through and got them up to the pole. And our narrator, do you remember her name? Lowell Thomas?
Oh, yeah.
Very famous narrator. Anyway, it was his film. So at the last moment, he flew up and sitting at the North Pole, he's interviewing all these people who had tried themselves. Done deal. We headed for Greenland, and Burnt Balkan said, "Hey, I just heard that I'm wanted at the South Pole to test some equipment. And would you do the same thing you're doing here for me? We'd like to film it and go directly from here to the South Pole." Well, whoosh! So I called up from Greenland and spoke to my wife, and I said, "What do you think?" Silence. I hadn't seen my newborn child. We hadn't seen each other for 6 months. I decided against it.
Yeah.
Maybe the only mistake that I really know, thinking all the way back. Could have gone from the north to the south.
You have regrets about not having done that?
Nah, regrets, schmets, you know.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to talk about anyway.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It was good to be home too.
Yeah, I'll bet it was.
And then from home, we continued on films, and at some point or other, I had had an offer to go to the West Coast, which meant the whole family moving to the West Coast. And we were living very well, still in the village, but no longer a Coldwater Flat or over on Morton Street. Mm-hmm. We were now living in a penthouse on Lower Fifth. And no crew, nothing, free, make 2 films a year. And hey, it was a pretty good license. Not to steal, it was good work. My wife loved filmmaking. Mm-hmm. Barbara just loved it. But she also had 3 very young children, mm-hmm. 2 and 1 in the basket. And suddenly I knew I didn't want to make films for a lifetime. That I loved the whole thing. I was proud of what I had done, but the hands-on, there was an immediacy that isn't in film, or it's only in a few people, filmmakers, Ingmar Bergman and whatnot, mm-hmm. who can combine all the power and the resources with this individual thing. Anyway, I wasn't finding it. And I quit, and we had enough sort of money to get along, and I played chess for 6 months to try to find out. A place called Figaro's in the village, I don't know. You know. Okay. And somewhere along the line...
So you literally played chess? I mean,
I played chess for 6 months. I had no idea what I was going to do. We were going broke, but everybody thought, listen, this guy's very successful, he's going to pay, so Gristides and the rent, and everybody was carrying it. And I just played chess, but till dawn every day, that kind of chess. And somewhere along the line, at the end of that period, I came home and I had seen somebody sketching, and I had just took some Indy ink, went like this, and said, "This is what I want to do." And I can still remember the look of my wife's face. I mean, one child hadn't been born yet, our youngest, our son Scott, and that was it. And helped me in every way. I took a studio in the east side, Hungarian section overlooking a cemetery, a 4th floor walk-up, and I painted 18, 20 hours a day.
Did you have any art training?
I'm sorry?
Did you have any art training?
Absolutely none. I couldn't draw a straight line. And I was afraid of being taught. I was still afraid, right back to the school in the beginning, because I had been taught by Barbara, really, and everybody else on films. And here I was, 7 years later, and coming up with, hey, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I want something more personal. And so I figured I'd better do it myself. New York was the center of art of the world right then. For the first time ever, the excitement in art was tremendous. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, I got things enough together and finally showed the first few things, and we opened a small gallery and grabbed enough money together that we went overseas. $650, 3 children, the other 2 came, 2 cats and a dog, and my art materials and a new career. And I go to Spain, where it's the end of the world.
Uh-huh. Why Spain? Why did you decide to go?
I think I'm Sephardic, I'm not sure. But
So was your roots calling you?
It was roots, really. It had to do, it was also leaving America.
Yeah.
This was 1962, and lots of stuff was happening. And I just felt, and New York was fantastic. It's not that we didn't like New York, and the film business was fantastic. It just, I don't know. It was one of those guesses you make in life, and she went along with me, and we got into Spain, and we spent 28 years there.
You said it was also America. I mean, you had been very patriotic during the war, and I mean, you put your life on the line many times for this country. What changed between 1944 and 1962?
Well, maybe it wasn't what changed. Well, I don't know my individual feelings, but in the country, you went from not a highway to a whole highway system. You went from not a suburb to all suburban life. Mm-hmm. And I'm not putting it down in that sense, but for me it wasn't working. It wasn't being up in the mountains, and I never thought to go back or anything. Mm-hmm. And I wanted something or other. I couldn't put it in words. There was no way. And I had a lot to work out. I mean, when you have, it's one thing to paint. When you have 5 mouths to feed and whatnot, and Scott was 1 year old when we left. Our daughter Suri was 3. Our older daughter was 5. Uh-huh. And the boys were 12 or 10 or 12 or 9 or 10.
And you didn't have much money in reserve.
We had nothing.
Nothing.
We had nothing, and no income coming in either.
Yeah.
Made it. That's all I can tell you. Mm-hmm. And it was magnificent. Uh-huh. And we would have stayed forever.
Where in Spain did you go?
A friend of mine that I had met in Figueroas had told me about the Costa del Sol. Mm-hmm. He said it's the last place on earth right now. It's sort of like Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway's Côte d'Azur in the 1920s. It's its moment. If you
Costa Brava or
no,
Costa del Sol?
No, Costa del Sol. Costa Brava is out by Barcelona. This was a new coast.
This was south.
And we went in, and there were no tourists. There were people like me who were floating in from here and there and whatnot. But it was magnificent from the day we got there. All kinds of problems, obviously. Not speaking the language, not having any money, blah, 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 blah. But one way or the other it worked, and who knew it began to bring tourists in. And for that reason, I was able to sell things. And somebody actually came in and bought a good number of canvases, which I went back to New York and opened a gallery on Madison Avenue across on the Whitney, and then went back to Spain again. And that was the beginning of Hollander galleries all over. At any rate, we stayed on the coast from 1962 to 1968, and then it was just too many tourists coming in. They were going to build an airport. They were going to bring in big planes. And we went inland and bought a very inexpensive piece of land on a bull ranch, and I built a house, also with no money. But in those days, lots of things could happen. You could trade and barter canvases, and there's lots of ways to move. If you're healthy, you're in good shape.
Yeah. Huh. And then you remained in this house that you built on the bull ranch until you came back to the States. We built it in 1 year in 1968. And not only built it, but the entire house was made. It was a reconstruction. There was nothing there before but rocks. Mm-hmm. But a reconstruction in the sense that everything that went in the house came out of the 13th to the 16th century. Because Spain was having a lot of tourists coming in, and they figured maybe we'll get out of the doldrums by serving our tourist industry, so they started destroying all the old buildings in the royal cities. And while they were destroying, I was trading canvases for what was in those old buildings. Oh, okay. So iron rejas, doors, roof tiles by the many, many thousand, bricks by the 10,000 that were made on people's thighs. Yeah. And we built our house out of it. It was magnificent. How magnificent. Oh.
Yeah.
And we've got a photograph
I bought some photographs of it.
Yeah.
The place was called Cortijo de las Yeguas, which is farmhouse of the mayors. And mayors, why? Because somewheres when we were on the Costa del Sol with two daughters young, I rented a horse. One of them wanted to ride at 5 years old or 6 years old. So we rented a horse, and that went well. So we rented another horse. And we ended up with a lot of horses. We ended up with some 25 Arabs and a whole lifetime of horses and riding every day and trip riding. I mean, things, at one point or other, I think it was 1973, we went from Yeguas, which is in Malaga province, to Pamplona. We had been going to Pamplona every year. It was
For the
magnificent running of the bulls. But we went by horse. 1,000 miles, like the bike trip.
Yeah, yeah.
It was memories of the bike, and it occurred to me any number of times on this trip. It was the same thing, only I had my whole family with me at the time. And we crossed Spain and got there just in time, 33 days of riding, got there in time to run with the bulls. So, you know, it was a different life. I didn't know any of this, it was a hint of it as we were in New York. As I say, New York and the Village in films in 1950s, it was heaven on earth. But I have never, and I've painted a lot of paintings. I mean, I'm a painter, and there are over 13,000 of my canvases somewheres in the world. And but I never start painting one that hasn't got that feeling of the very first time I touched anything on canvas. I love it. I've been in love with it ever since.
What's that feeling that you get?
Well, it's a love affair. You can put it in those terms and whatnot. You know you're in love. That's it.
With each canvas?
No, not with the act of painting, not with the canvas at all. Okay. Oh, no. I won't say I don't look at them and whatnot. No, I don't hold them like that. They're not my children. They're not this and that. No, it's the act of painting and expressing, just letting yourself come out on it. Some people do it writing. Some people do it in whatever business they're in. I found it this way.
Do you have an idea before you start a painting, or is it more of a feeling?
Never an idea. None of it's based on ideas.
Yeah.
Feelings, yes, expression, but who knows what the feelings are? It's a mood, in a sense. And I've worked out my own style. Never did see anybody paint along the way. My friend Fritz that I had mentioned, Fritz Mooney, who had told us about the Costa del Sol, came and painted with me a few times, so I did see him. But other than that, never. It's a very private kind of a thing. But I'm a very involved painter. My life has been since 1960, the end of 1960, really painting. And a few other things like horses every day, or 500 snowmobile trips out into the wilderness here. I mean, there've been a few other things.
You're still an active painter.
Oh yeah, very much. I brought in a few things. I was going to try to get to you guys because I thought this whole thing would be much better done in my house and studio while I'm painting. Painters talking is, well, I won't say it, but you know what I mean. So what, you know? But painters painting or talking while you're painting, while you're doing your thing. I had just been working on a 7 by 14 foot canvas, which is a bit of a trick with the oxygen and moving in and out, and then all of a sudden, come to think of it, all of a sudden you can forget very easily. All kinds of stuff can go wrong with this. It's really no big deal. It's a big deal if you don't have it. You
don't seem short of breath.
No, I'm okay right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any connection, do you think, between your experience in the military and your painting?
None that I know of.
No.
None. Except there was a reality in the entire military thing. None of it was false. I'm not pushing it. I'm not saying I'm very much against, for instance, the Iraq War now. I was from the very first day. I think the whole thing is a horror. I won't go into it now, but I just do. I'm against almost all wars, but yeah. But that surely hadn't occurred to me in World War II, and it felt that it had to be done. But the reality and the living on the edge, walking on that fine edge where you don't really even have control, is, in that sense, it might have been a tie-in in that when you're painting, you're blind. It's harder in a way now than it was when I started, because when I started, you don't know anything. So whatever you're doing, and it's yours, and you know you're involved. But as you go on, there's expertise that comes in. You learn, because one way or the other, you have to learn everything that's been done out there. You can't be painting when you feel you can't do this and this and this. And so, but you do it, you see it come up and say, son of a bitch, that's where it came from. You know, that's how we did it, and so on. You found it yourself, and it's yours. Not an egotistical thing. It's a just that allow you to be and express. I got lost in the conversation.
Well, I was asking about the connection between your military experience and your art, and even though you said I don't see any connection, you then went on to say
the immediacy,
that in both of them you're living on the edge. You're moving into the unknown.
I think, well, yeah, but I can drop back and say that bike was the edge too. I didn't realize that I couldn't put it into words.
Yeah.
You don't put that very much into words at 13, I don't think, that hold all the way through. But it was the same kind of stuff. And wherever I found it, it has turned me on greatly. And I found it in painting because, as I was going to say, now knowing how to paint, there are many, many things that you can do that they're not artifice, they're things you can do that make things better. Well, it's very easy to do those and make something without making a painting. That isn't painting. That's knowing how to paint and using it, but maybe it shouldn't be used. You're using it because you happen to know it. So in a way, it's harder now. You have to break through that kind of thing too in order to stay alive with it.
That otherwise it becomes routine. It becomes dead for you.
Well, it's never been that, so I don't think it'll ever become it for me. But it's mine. What I do and what other people see in it or whatever happens in the art field, I won't even talk about. I mean, that's the more esoteric an endeavor is, the worse the field is, the business end of it. It gets pretentious, it gets all kinds of things. And it's not only in art, it goes into ballet and it goes into all kinds of very fine endeavors. But that's a business end, that's something else. The actual doing it, to be involved in, for me, it's never changed.
Why did you come back to Colorado, to Aspen?
I've been playing tennis since I was probably 10 years old. I love it. Absolutely loved it. And in Spain, that continued.
We're getting some noise from behind.
In Spain, that continued. And on the coast, when we were there, I played a little, but not very much. We went back into Yeguas. I actually built a court there and played a lot of tennis. I mean, I was in love with it. The kids were on their way by that time when they were about 15 years old. I like to say we kicked them out of the house. Barbie goes, like this. No, but we encouraged them out, and they did. They went out on their own, but people watching and, the places where there was a contact and got in, life started, which is what we would have liked to have done ourselves, and it took longer. Anyway, I was playing tennis. I got quite good. Enjoyed it very much. Our kids are out of the house completely, and we were part of a tennis club on the coast. Lou Hoden, a Australian tennis star back in his years, and I was playing for the club championship. And I'm playing a young guy, actually a Turk, who I didn't get along with at all, and I'm winning. And he got very mad at one point. And he's screaming on the other side of the net, some shot was wrong, and I must have said, whatever it is, Came running at me, jumped with a racket and went whang. and in doing so caught me here, broke my sinus, my jaw, blew out my left bundle branch. So, it's 1982, I'm 8 years old or something or other, and I'm in trouble. I'm fibrillating once or twice a week, and I have no electrical branch and not a good prognosis. Came into the States, had it checked and this and that, and they said, you know, you got 5 or 10 years, you got a problem, and there's nothing you can do about except enjoy life and good diet and this and that. So life did change a lot. I hung around for about 8 years at Yeguas in our home, and then it became very clear, getting hauled away in the middle of the night, that I wasn't going to make it, and we're not going to be able to see grandchildren that haven't been born yet. And we came back to the States, 1990. I gave up, and it was a good move. It came into Aspen to take a look. It's a great place to come with a heart problem, right? Well, it turned out to be yes. I fell in love all over again, and I think it kept me alive.
And it sounds like you got very active in wilderness activities once you got active in wilderness activities.
Well, that's why I
once
came
you
out here. Barb loves the city. I love the wilderness, and I hate machines. Always have. And I managed to buy an old Toyota and a $80 snowmobile from T-Lazy 7, and I took off on it and never been on anything in my life in a machine backcountry. And over the period, which was 1991 until 2 years ago, I've been over 500 times backcountry above tree level alone. Maybe a dozen and a half of those times with somebody I was taking out to show and to experience it, none of whom ever wanted to go again. I love it. I think it, and I hate the machine, but there's no way of doing it. I'm a painter. I want to get back and paint. In 1 hour, I'm at a Taylor or up on Pearl, and you're on the edge all the way. It's wonderful. Just like World War II.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like...
I'm grounded now.
but it sounds like that's a theme through your life, is living on the edge.
That's what my barber accuses me of. Yeah, I don't know, maybe. It's not a mental thing. It's not a mental awareness.
Yeah.
It's an adrenaline kind of thing and a rush, and it's testing yourself against something. I want to stay alive. I want to stay alive now. I do everything I can with this. I still got the same heart problem, and this lung thing is, I don't know how old people in Spain, they call it la tercera edad, the third age. It's a great way to put it. How they handle oxygen. There's so many things that can go wrong. You can't believe it. And when they go wrong, you can be in real trouble. And your mind isn't sharp and clear, and the synapses have started to go. And but on the other hand, that's a pretty big challenge too. So.
What do you think living on the edge has done for you through your life? I mean, what's the payoff for you?
Well, obviously it worked for Barbie. So I got her, or she got me. I mean, maybe that was part of it. She wouldn't have put it in those words because she had never seen a mountain or all the things that I've dragged her on and so on. I don't know. It's been a full life. I wouldn't change a thing on that score. We had one tragedy in our life. My older son, Mark, died in 1970 in Spain, an accident. And 25 years old, and that's life. It's people go through lives, things happen, and going, and so for a year or a half a year, you go into a tailspin and this and that, and then somehow or other you got to tell yourself. That isn't the way to honor anybody or anything, and get to work. And so bring them with you. So I go walking now. I walk every morning. I'm sort of grounded. I can't go backcountry. I got the snowmobile in the driveway. I refuse to give it away or anything. It's good not to smell that gas, believe me. But I go walking with my 3 dogs. And at dawn, it was the most gorgeous full moon this morning. At dawn, you just couldn't believe. Never in my life have I seen any in the West. Oh, just like this.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. And I go walking with them, and I lost the thread again. I'm sorry.
You were.
You lost it too. You're getting there.
I did. You were talking about. I'd asked you about living on the edge, and you're talking, I think, about what makes your life worthwhile. The activities that you do now.
I mean, that's just that's a general. You're using yourself, no matter what it is. Everybody can do it in different ways. For me, a physical thing it's been, but right now it's not that physical thing, and yet in a way it's more than it ever was, because now it's hard. Not only with the oxygen, but as you get into this third age, right,
okay.
which you have a long way to go, everything is harder, right? It's not that simple thing. You lose some synapses in your head. You're not Alzheimer, but you lose them.
Yeah.
And so the immediate thing you're not going to remember. So you have to get around it if you want to do it. And you can fight it, and you can. There's all kinds of ways. And when it changes and you can't, big deal. There's the next thing and going. There's always, as long as you're breathing, there's something. I dropped dead literally March 31st in front of my wife. I had a total heart arrest. Yeah. It just like that. And she had the presence of mind. It was right in front of her. I had just come in from a walk with the dogs. Fortunately, it wasn't outside. And right in front of her chair, it went like that. No pulse, nothing. And she called 911, got on me on CPR, and my son, who lives on the West Coast, happened to walk in right then with 3 minutes gone, and he got on me and managed to break a rib, which you usually do, and got me out. I'm one of those people who got out. So I've been there, you know? This is free time, just freebie. It's hard, but it's also very challenging. It's wonderful. It's a good time. Hang in there. I advise anybody. If you got your person, if you got your person along the way, and you got your work or what you did, and you have your memories, and go for it. You know, it's worth trying.
Well, you seem very much alive.
I feel it.
Yeah.
Especially having died.
Yeah.
No, I'm not kidding. It's and no tunnels or anything. Boom. That's it. In one fraction of a fraction, not even knowing you're going. And then you wake up 6 minutes later and realize what's happened. And that's it. You're out. You know.
Yeah. Well, you've been living on bonus time ever since
borrowed.
That, ever since that
ever
that tunnel.
since this here.
Well, no,
1982.
But I'm thinking back in '45 when you were in that tunnel. I mean, you very easily
10 million men we had out there. A lot of people, not 10 million in combat. But 10 million men, of which 1 million or 1.5 million, whatever it is a very common thing. You don't think of it in that sense. But on the other hand, you think, hey, I was lucky I got through, and each chooses to live his life the way they will. And the determining factor probably was part of that, of considering, are you living it or not, you know.
Yeah. Are there any other things that we should talk about before we bring the interview to a close? I said before we bring the interview to a close. Any other things that...
very family-oriented. 5 children, 9 grandchildren. All the guys and gals are out in their own life. And the thing we stressed, that doesn't mean anything happens that way, but the thing we stressed was do it your way, you know, and go. And they all are their own way. We're all very different. Very close. We're very animal-oriented, my wife and I. We share everything together. It's been, you got to be lucky. It's 53 years and very rich. No regrets or anything. It could happen tomorrow, and I wouldn't, you know. But I'm not going to let it happen unless I still like life.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't do that to her. So I'll hang in there as long as I can.
Yeah.
But no wars. Don't get me on that subject unless you ask me. I'll tell you.
Well, tell me.
Oh, I think it's horrible what we're doing. Just a horror. Horrible situation. And I know the politics involved and what the problems are and what problems are for both parties and resolving it right now. The country is way ahead of them. They don't want it. They want it over and that's it. We haven't done any favors to anybody and there's suffering all over the world coming out of this. And it'll continue. We're in danger because of it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not with that kind of thing.
You've never had any doubts
And the
about...
soldiers that are involved in right now, oh God, what they're going through. I mean, there's no question of the hardships. It's constant. It's one thing to lie in a foxhole, and they're going to have to come to you. No matter where you're going there, you don't know where it's going to hit, and it's all very, very difficult. So, anyway.
You've had no doubt about the rightness of World War II.
None at all.
Any wars since then that that you think have been worth fighting?
None.
None.
None. Absolutely none. And especially this one.
Yeah.
But Vietnam, of course, but none really. There were other ways of resolving the same thing. Yeah, we went through, it's very easy for everybody now, but we went through a time in which it was the nuclear holocaust that was going to happen. It was hanging over everybody's head, and it was a lot closer than we thought, actually. And it had to be resolved, and how it got resolved as it did is a miracle of miracles. People who came up through that age have always gone, oh, how do we get away with this thing? And now it's a non-existent thing. But wars are not the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I very much enjoyed talking with you today. Your love of life and enthusiasm is contagious.
You got a sparkle in your eye.
And so it's been a real pleasure, and I'd like to thank you for talking with me, and I'd like to thank you for your service to your country.
It's been a pleasure both ways.
Good.